Hi, everyone. So excited to be here. It's a beautiful Wednesday in Colorado, and I got a fellow Coloradoan, if that's a good term, with me, Karl Dakin, who's just somebody I really appreciate and admire for his talents, especially as it comes down to funding. And today is going to be a wonderful show. Our keyword is community. We were just talking about that briefly before coming on the air. Chat's wide open. It really helps us in directing our conversation thoughts so we can be more relevant to you and give you some valuable takeaways. Karl has a wonderful show Tuesdays mornings that maybe he can share a little bit more detail with, so I don't say something that I'm not sure of or not say enough that I should be more sure of. And with that said, I'll turn it over to Karl. Karl can give you a little bit freshen up on who he is if you're not aware of him, and a little bit more if you are aware of him. And again, the word of the day is community, so let's try and wrap our heads around that. Karl, welcome today to the show.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate being a guest on your show this morning. It is Wednesday. I verified my calendar to make sure I remembered where I was at today. Um, yeah, so what I do, just as a background, I work with small businesses and community projects to help them raise funding. And I don't do that as a broker where I stand between the person and a potential investor. I work with the group who's seeking to raise funding. And that means getting everything ready to go, getting ready to receive capital. Sometimes that may end up being the biggest, hardest challenge, that once we got everything ready to go, then investors are happy to make an investment. But getting that idea across, communicating it directly to an investor, so an investor hears you talking about them and not about you, then it's easier for them to align and like and benefit and go forward. And we're going to talk today about community because the community is your best possible source of investors for your project, no matter who you are, where you are. And we've talked about on this show and other places that relationships should be considered as your single most valuable asset. And what a community is a group of relationships that you are intentionally, methodically developing, building, working, maintaining, so that they're kind of in a standby mode. Whenever you need to raise money, they can write a check. And as an example of that, one of the many things I'm doing right now is I'm running a short 18-day charitable campaign for a local charity where I will be running a 5K race. Running will be a loose term we're going to use here today for what I'm going to do on Saturday. Um, but I created a list from my community and I prioritized it as I do based upon what I anticipate their interest is and their affinity and all these kinds of things that drive their decision making. And I picked out 73 people and I said, I'm going to ask them to donate to this cause. And I expect from my past experience, only a small percentage, far less than half, will actually make a donation. And the point of this was I wanted to do a live demonstration in small scale, manageable scale for everybody I work with, that even your best list of potential investor candidates or donor candidates is not going to respond unanimously to your request. And then if you step out of the people you know, you step from the people that are prioritized to lesser prioritized or maybe candidates or people you don't know at all, this number plummets. And you find yourself where you need to talk to everybody even to get anything done. And that's where you need to sharpen your tool set. You need to go out and do a better job of figuring out who cares, why they care, where they come from. And rather than waiting to do this until the day that you need to raise funding, you should go back as quickly as possible. Today's a good day to start and work on building your community and doing it purposely. Understand not everybody's going to write checks, but they could be an advisor to you. They could be a source of information. They could be a product vendor person to you, but they all have a reason why they want you to succeed. And if they have that common interest in your success, then in their own self-interest, they're going to help you out as best they can. Now, you may not be high on their priority list, and maybe you need to work on that a little bit, but um, it's part of the process of getting out there when you're raising funding, is to prepare as much in advance, build your community, make sure you know who you're talking to and why they care, and with that, you're as armed and prepared as best as you can be when you need to raise capital. It's not a guarantee, as I said, like in this charitable donation campaign, I'm about 60% to my low dollar goal of $1,000. And even though I've done some social media posts, I'm primarily emailing followed by phone calling people because I want to talk to them person to person. They're in relationships of mine. I want to honor and respect that relationship as much as I can within the limited amount of time that I can both allocate to this and commit to doing this. So I'm involved in a large number of projects that are spanning the United States, helping other people put together capital campaigns, and they have a lot of this same commonality. Community is the key commonality that you would seek in each of these campaigns.
Yeah, I believe that gives one so much opportunity for thought. And, my takeaway from what you were mentioning is there isn't always a direct approach between wanting something and achieving something. So you can't just say, I want to do this and reach out and everybody just jumps right in. If that was the case, you probably have something that's so obvious and so valuable, you really don't have to do much to bring people together. But everybody has to look at themselves and say, well, when you're first engaged or communicated with somebody who has something to offer, your typical nature is a little bit more reserved, a little bit more skeptical. I'm busy. This is one more thing. And you start out with let's say a headwind, that you need to overcome. But those things are really benefited from consistent messaging, and messaging that on its face is valuable in itself, and then can stage and scale and build on that. And, although you get a zero response sometimes, you do get a positive impact every time, right? Because you get a little bit more top of mind awareness. You get somebody who comes back. And I think that's another key. You think when you're coming back with your second or third message, you may be intruding, but you're definitely not, because you haven't even been involved in any way, right? It's only when you come the second or third time people know you're serious because you decided to show up again. At a certain point, you can say after a certain amount of times, I'm going to give it a rest, or maybe reevaluate how I chose these people, what I learned from the participators who I can model, and not the ones who were, kind of deaf to my proposal. And then the other big benefit of community, and it really is funny how it connects with communication, if you change the last few letters, is that you can support yourself through other people's communities, right? Through other people's influence and from other people's association. So people right now who are watching the show because of Karl are being introduced to me, and vice versa. When I look at who Karl has on as his guest, that's an opportunity because we already share a similarity that we're working together. And that's something, people need reference. People need context. They may not know who you are, but they know who the person that you're associated with. And that's almost halfway to a referral. A referral is the best when someone calls somebody up and says, hey, you really need to get in touch with this person. Here's their number or their email. I'm a big supporter of them. And now you got a tailwind coming in for you. And that's how you have to kind of, let's say, weave this, where you're doing some direct stuff, you're doing some indirect stuff, even commenting on other people's posts. We had Erwin this week, and that's one of his priorities, is to get seen and heard through other people's posts or comments. And eventually you build goodwill. And I think you need to generate that goodwill and that safety mechanism that says, hey, I'm not going to get hurt. This guy's a good guy, and he's going to probably do the right thing for me. And you kind of tend to see the right thing by how they continue to level up with you. But it's all about doing things when you don't need them the most. It's in the construction area. It's too late, like anything. If you need a job yesterday, going out and saying, I need a job, is not going to put you in a good position. But if you can get involved with people without pressure, without like, I have to have it right now, then that changes everything. So it's really about understanding the terrain that you're walking on, especially like LinkedIn and live streaming, is what works, not what just gets attention, because you can get a lot of attention without any result. And then you just became an entertainer or an educator. And I think, that's not a direct approach. So there's so much to it. And that's why I believe connecting with people who are already in the game, who are already playing that type of game, and learning with them and from them, and eventually developing something together. So collaboration is so important. It gives you leverage, it gives you scale, and it gives you awareness. So we've got a LinkedIn user who I would probably say is, it could be Jason. I would think it might be Carrie, but Carrie always carries a joke. I could probably check real quick, and I might, to see exactly who it is. And I think when people have LinkedIn user as opposed to their name and face, I think it's a factor of who you are allowing to see you, right? Because LinkedIn gives you like the mode where it's like incognito and no one can see you, and then gives you the ability for people to see something but not you. So anyways, didn't want to get into that, but thank you for wishing us a good morning. Anybody else out in the audience? I see we have quite a few people. If you just want to share your name, where you're from, or anything else, glad to recognize you and support and promote you here. So, when we're talking about community, it really is a step up from just connecting with people, right? You can have a lot of connections and not have any community. And then the key is what kind of community are you building? Are you building a inclusive community? Are you building a like-minded community? And ultimately, are you doing something that will build working together, collaborating? So moving from connection to community to collaboration is usually the 3 stepping stones that one can see the future. And if you already know what the result you want to happen when you first start, you've got a process or a system. If it's just a feather in the wind, maybe you get lucky, maybe you don't, but it's hard to repeat. And then every building block you put in place at least is stable and there for the next step. So, Karl, I know through all your years of experience, you've been involved with a lot of communities, you've developed a lot of communities. What have you found to be the common thread to successful communities?
Well, there are a number, as you expect, more than one thing that kind of goes into that. And I think that the hard part is defining who you are and who you want to participate or to be working with within a community. I belong to a lot of professional organizations, economic development groups, so forth. Sometimes I think I've been over 20 at one time. And I have a thread of something I'm doing with each of them, or I wouldn't bother to participate or be a member or pay a fee. But quite often I find myself at the periphery. I'm not centered to what the organization is doing. I'm often a bridge almost between two organizations, where I'm doing funding for this industry or funding for this particular purpose. So as a result, I'm more confused than the average person about who I am. But I try to define, what's good for me, and in working with you, and what I'm doing in my daily newsletter, my instant funding newsletter, and in my weekly show, which is the Successful Funding Show. I'm actually focusing on other people who work with small businesses to help them raise funding. And this may seem to a lot of people like, well, how can you get anything done when you have such an ultra high focus? But it turns out that for me to do what I need to do, I need to work with other people. I team with different people on every project. And I have what I've now identified approximately 30 different buckets or player positions to do a particular project that I may draw upon. And not all of them fit or have time or whatever. So maybe I need to have depth on the bench of 3, 4, or 5 people. And now I'm up to 100 to 150 people that I really would like to have in my community and working with them. And for them to join me, we all have to understand what I'm doing, what I care about, and why that is potentially a benefit to them. And I have to be able to communicate that to them. So the first thing we talked about is defining, what is the core, or what is the commonality, and then communicating that so people can understand why belonging, participating would be of benefit to them. And then, as you mentioned before, you have to make an investment into these relationships. It's a pay it forward thing. And so part of the reason I do my daily newsletter is I'm sharing things I know about raising funding. And that is, in my way, attempting to say, here's something I've learned I can share. It may be of value to you. I'm doing it daily so they know that this is something that's not done to earn a special position for a particular thing. It's a constant that's out there. So we're adding more C's to this conversation. I can see we're going to stack them all up here before we get done. But if I know what I want to do and narrow it down, so I'm not trying to be everything to everybody, I recognize I'm making investments in relationships, and I have to have a plan and a budget for doing that. And then I make that investment. Then I see my community building now. I see it's getting stronger, not quite necessarily daily, because this is a long-term investment, but it's clearly trending in the right direction. And it's kind of my goal by the end of this year, maybe mid next year, a year from now, that I do have these 150 people that are in my community, and somehow I'm providing value to all of them, even if it's only the newsletter, but hopefully more than that. And if I can do that, then I feel like I'm going to, have the ability to basically take on any project, anytime, anywhere, but it's my choice. And then if we go out to raise funding, these people are not investor candidates. That's not why they're being brought to the party, so to speak. They're there to be a host or co-host of the party when we go out to raise capital. And but their networks, their relationships are all possible sources of investment or other types of support or other things that we're trying to do. And I, in my posting yesterday, I on my instant funding newsletter, I'm working with a project that is a community investment fund. We're just at the early design phase. And I was trying to identify all the people who may participate in this project. It could end up being in the hundreds, high hundreds of people who have an active role somewhere, not passive. And I'm not even including the investors. I'm just talking to, the people who are helping get the job done. And you can't do a project of this nature if you don't have a community, if you don't have these relationships in place. So it's very important in thinking about community that you have a purpose, a plan, and you implement that plan continuously, another C word, that I know you favor, but I've learned to appreciate it because everybody's being pulled in every direction. We all find our time getting shrunk. AI is helping us do things quicker, faster, but it seems like to me it's making everything shorter. We went from 5 minutes of fame to 5 seconds of fame, kind of a thing. And so we're just have to be better practitioners of being ourselves.
Well, those are really important points that you articulate so well. And response to initiative is so important, because if all you hear is your own mind speaking to you, it's kind of not a very valuable poll of one. As soon as you get feedback, whether it's from the audience or preferably from a colleague or co-host, you kind of put that in a category. And if more people continue to respond in that way, you feel like you probably hit a nerve. So yesterday I was talking with Helena, who was on with Beverly a few weeks ago, and she's considering, doing a show here, but was so emphatic about, I know 6 or 7 people who haven't got their first show who could use a show, and I'm definitely going to refer them to you. So your first person may not be the person, but it is a step towards that person. And that's what and if people are saying things to you independently, maybe you should say this to people proactively, right? By the way, if people would like to do what we're doing here or get to learn how we're doing it, happy to get to know them, bring them on as a guest, because we're at the front end of live streaming. It's not very well developed. Most people don't know what it is. The people who know a little bit are kind of afraid of it because they're not used to being exposed publicly and live. But that's where you have to build some inroads. And by allowing an opportunity to have a co-host, you're actually giving them a gift. Allowing somebody to have a Zoom with you, you're just allowing them to have another conversation that has no direction up front, may turn out to be valuable as you go through it. And then the key is how do you take something and build on it? So you're better off, I've always felt, doing more business with less players and working more intimately with them than being kind of superficial with a lot of people that doesn't have any stickiness or any focus towards the future, because everybody's wanting to do better. That's a universal belief one can have. And everybody's using all their time because they get through the day somehow. But how do you redirect, reposition to higher levels of efficiency, especially relative to time? Because that's the answer I usually get. I love what you're doing, but I'm all booked up. I got all this stuff. And you're dealing with a person who's knowingly aware of what they do, but unknowingly aware of what they could be doing, right? People just don't know what they don't know. And everybody knows that change by itself is difficult. If I just say, let's do this on a different time, that complicates things. So people like routines, people like discipline. And I think that's so important, because consideration of what's somebody's interest, what somebody's needs, it's all about them initially, versus I got something for you and you didn't even know if they wanted it, needed it, or cared about it. And all of a sudden you're going to build a lot of resistance that you're going to have to overcome. So it is part science, but it is also part creativity. The nice thing is you're focused on, at least with LinkedIn, 1 billion potential players. So you just have to chip a little bit off to get a lot if you do it right. But the other big thing is things can be sustainable and scalable that way. It's not like hitting a lottery and tomorrow your dollar's worth as much as anybody else's in it. The other point that Karl made, I think that's important, is consistency. There's a saying, familiarity builds reputation. So the more they see you, the more they know you over the people they don't see that often or don't see at all. So just being there says, hey, he's a player. He shows up every week. He shows up every day with his newsletter. He's working it. Who do you want to be with? People who are working hard at what they're doing, which means they'll probably be hard at what they're doing with you and for you. And it's all, how do you get a quality shortcut, which is the knowledge curve or the learning curve. If you can get somewhere 3 months earlier, why wouldn't you? If you can avoid making mistakes that everybody's going to make on their own, why wouldn't you? I actually looked up, it is Jason Girardo. I was right on my first thought. But this is intriguing, because it is like setting a stage and then using that stage as a platform to continue to elevate and bring people with you. Because LinkedIn has the numbers. I mean, this is 24 times as powerful on comments as just organic video, which is 5 times greater than text posting. So one quality live stream could have 120 times the effect of a post, or you could do 3 live streams and get 360 days of posting value. And you don't have to get it all. Again, if the opportunity is big enough, you just got to be good enough not to be bad, to be successful at it and continue to grow with it. So Karl, what have you found when you're building teams to keep people interested, to keep people involved, and continue to build with them?
Yeah, so it's interesting evolution of working with you and finding that this idea of building a community as an asset, as a collection of intentional relationships, is becoming more and more important to people. That if you're going to sell a new product or service as a small business, if you're going to try to make changes in your local community using the geographic description as opposed to the digital description, it's important to have the relationship tuned up so it's not rusty, it's ready to go. I call it the fire department, standby fire department kind of mentality. To do that, you have to be engaging with someone. You can't just talk to them every 2 years and say, oh, by the way, although I can't say I'm not guilty of that, because it's hard to keep up with everybody. But that's why, as I'm working in my community and building it, I recognize there's certain things require face-to-face. I have to be in the room with somebody. I can do more things if I'm in Zoom, so I can talk to people in 10 states today and everything's okay. And then I have my show where I'm interviewing people, and it's one-on-one, but the audience makes up a larger crowd. And then my newsletters, I on Sunday, I had people push me, Karl, you're pushing so much information out, I can't absorb it all. So I created a weekly edition that will be a compilation of everything I do during the week, and people can elect whether they want daily or weekly to do that. But this is me trying to touch all my subscribers. And then, Don, as I continue to be mentored and tutored by you, I keep adding new skills like recognition of somebody, where you call them out and say, hey, I saw somebody put it in the newsletter, or do a posting, which in LinkedIn is different from a newsletter or an article, and it's treated differently and distributed differently. So I'm kind of mixing it up there. But every time I post my newsletter, I also then repost it to Facebook and repost it to X, formerly Twitter. I'll be happy when we quit doing that, but I don't know how long that's going to take. I'm not an Instagram person, and I know a lot of young people are just shaking their head when I say that, but I haven't quite figured out how to master the short video clip, but I'm going to get there. So just hang in there, and I'll figure that out. But the main thing is always talking to your audience, not with a request, not with anything that's a pitch, not anything that's a sale, because they don't want to hear that. If they do want to hear it, they'll come to you and ask you about it because you have a relationship. Or if you post something up like I did a couple nights ago, I kind of got a number of immediate emails. Where have you been all my life? Kind of a thing. I go, I must have hit a nerve here somewhere with this particular posting. So think in terms of who you're talking to, whether it's one on many, one on one, one on a few. Think about how you can help them constantly. That's got to be the foundation of your messaging, your communication. And by doing that, you are both communicating, but you're demonstrating your value of the person you're talking to. And that to me is essential to being part of a common community. I get stuff all the time coming in, LinkedIn, otherwise, saying, hey, look, I'm going to make you rich. I'm going to make you famous. I'm going to sell you something. And I can't even, it's how quickly can I turn that off, lock it, do something, because I just don't need somebody coming at me who doesn't know me, doesn't understand. I know Kelly Steinke, this is one of her things about what she calls the slap pitch. And you're like, communications that come at you hard, like you're an idiot, you don't know anything, and they're wonderful and they're going to make your life better, is selling a false fantasy that can never be true, even under the best conditions. But if I enter into that conversation saying, I think I know how to help you, help me verify that. If I can't, I'm going to back off. I accept those kind of communications because they are trying to be respectful of me and treat me like a person and not as a transaction. It's an evolving science, I think, right now. I think, as you say, LinkedIn live streaming, it's all very new. We're figuring things out. And that's all good because you can already see good feedback, good benefits coming out of it. But we have a lot to learn. If we're going to have an organization, a community of a large enough size, it becomes an organization by definition. And then you need people who are monitoring, coordinating, assisting, supporting that community. And then we're starting to ask ourselves, well, how can we scale? How can we grow up our community to be all it can be? And I started off just with kind of a goal of 100 to 150 people. What do you do when you get to the thousands? What do you do when you get to the 10,000s? These are questions I don't have answers for at the moment.
Well, that's a good thing about not having answers. You haven't peaked yet, right? When you know everything and have all the answers and you're not where you want to be, there's not a lot of room to expand. I want to recognize Omar. Omar is just a great guy. He has Zoom party. Good morning. Thank you, Don, for the clues. I was able to put together with Omar 5 clues for his show, and it was a successful show on Zoom party last night. And hi, Karl. Actually had couple Zoom party. One was from the US, I believe. Another one was, I think, from another part of the world. And, that's mixing it up. So thank you, Omar. Always glad to collaborate with you. And just like Jason, just like Karl, just like Kelly, we mentioned in the last 60 seconds, that's a community. It's kind of like a family. And I think what Karl pointed out, which is the typical initiative most people take, is just intrusive. Just flat out throw a message out there, hope it sticks. Canada was the other part of the other country. Thank you, Omar. You're listening and participating, which is great. And it shows immaturity. It shows you what level are they playing, what level are they thinking. And the reason it turns people off, in addition to being surprised that someone could read their mind and know exactly what they want without knowing them, is because you want to be respected, but you also want to run with the big dogs, right? You want to run with the faster ones, the ones who are already ahead of you, not the ones you look at and say, I used to do that when I didn't know anything. Why would I step backwards? because everybody's looking to climb the ladder. Who's on the step or two above you, who you might be able to learn something with, grow with, and it's being open to that. And in turn, what value do you have for them where you're a step or two ahead in certain areas? Because what's good for you is good for people like you, and not everybody's sitting there with a hand down. Most people are got a hand up. Somewhere there should be a meeting of the minds, and also it's personality and it's chemistry, right? Because anybody, not anybody, but most people can do most of the basic things, right? If you're looking for a plumber or a carpenter or an accountant, they're usually pretty skilled if they're doing it for a living and they're doing it long term. But who's honest? We talked about the other day with Irwin, who's got integrity, who's got a quality reputation, and who do you enjoy being around? What we're doing here today is this could be a consultative hour that me and Karl are having, right? Because we're sharing stuff, throwing things at each other, responding to it. And at the end of the session, we flushed out a few things. We might have confirmed some things and decided some things just don't have the value we thought they did. And in a dynamic marketplace or platform, you got to keep moving. It's going to move with or without you. Do you want to stay at the front end and maybe even lead? Or do you want to get dragged along and then maybe ultimately make the move to move forward? But again, it's what's your speed? I know looking back at Karl's newsletter, started with about 600, it's over 800. Well, someone could say that's a 25% increase, which is significant in a short period of time, starting with no inertia, no momentum, actually starting with legacy connections that may not be relevant to what Karl's doing, but the new connections, the 200 plus, are real, are relevant, and have grown because of the newsletter, not just because of a connection list. And again, it's picking out who is now the rising star in your community. Who's the person you can find the lowest hanging fruit with? And again, it's courtesy. It's inviting somebody on a show, even if they don't accept. You did it. You invited them, right? You created an opportunity, which in their mind might build some appreciation or gratitude to say, well, I've got something for you. The other thing is a no is a no. Take it as a no over time. Don't always beat yourself up to say, how do I get in there when I can't get in there? Well, there's other doors, right? And you can always come back because, there's a point where it gets to be, what's wrong with this person? Don't they know anybody else? Can't they get other people? So needy is not a good position or posture to be in, but saying I've got this and I've got this. And actually what I learned about hosts is if I share quality programs with them that they can view or at least be aware of the name who is with me, they might feel like, hey, this is something I should do. And what I don't like to do, and I know a lot of people don't like to be sold, I don't like to sell. I'm a very good salesman, but I don't, if I have to sell it, it's probably not the right person I'm talking to. And again, sales has different levels. You can call it promotion, you can call it marketing, you can call it whatever you want. But anytime you apply pressure when it's not necessary, is a positive thing, because some people just are not in the right time, in the right place at this time. And when they share that with you, sincerely believe them. Now, you'll always get a question from an answer, because someone will say this, okay, now that we're talking about this, let me share how that might have an impact. But people are going to do what they're going to do. And you want to be as honest and open. You don't want to be them trying to defend themselves or justify something. And it's just courtesy. Omar came up with USA and Canada, is learning that more comments gets more visibility and more exposure. And I think that's important is, even liking somebody's post. When I get my feed and I see somebody I know, I just hit the like button. It's real easy. They'll see me. I didn't have to put a lot of time or thought into commenting. And then other people tag you. And we talked about that as far as building community. I've got a gentleman, Paul Whitley, and he tags me every day. And honestly, every day I get 7 people from his community who respond to me. So anybody who tags you is, first of all, giving you name exposure. They're integrating you into their post. It takes so little time. And, someone could say, and I've never responded to his tags. I used to, because, I went from a lot to a little on purpose because I was tagging 150 people a day. I would say on average, 80 would say, thank you for the kind thoughts, or thank you for this. And that would naturally give me a chance to build a dialogue with them I chose. And by having 7 people a day see it, if 100 people tag me, that's 700 exposures I would have never gotten. And then I can choose whoever responds to me to say, hey, we got something. Or typically it's not like that, but it's okay. So, and I see Carl starting to tag. I know like Helena's tagging me, but it's good. As long as you don't take it as I have to respond, right? Someone put your name out there, great. How many people are going to do that? Especially people that have a huge following, great reputation. Why wouldn't you want that? And I think the key is not judging too quickly. If it doesn't hurt you, it probably helps you on LinkedIn. As long as they're not saying something negative or whatever. But you go with the flow. And I think that's important, is not get ahead of yourself. All you got to do is enough to cover the next period of time, and then reload, do next week, do the week after, because you allow yourself to adjust to the changes you're learning and identifying into your posts, into your hashtags. But again, that's another thing, because we talk about LinkedIn and we talk about live streaming, is what is best practices? How do you identify that you're doing things the best you can? And unless you investigate to see, well, how is this hashtag rating? You can have a hashtag that is followed by 10 people, which would be too small, or you could just put LinkedIn, which probably has 10 million people, and you'll never get, or hardly ever get, into that LinkedIn hashtag feed. So again, is where do you balance it? And more importantly, what is relevant to you, right? Getting a bunch of people to respond to something that you'll never do business with them, you're never involved in anything that's like-minded, it's just a waste of energy, a waste of time, unless you're into, just ego and saying 20,000 people saw this. But that's a negative if out of 20,000 people saw it, no one did anything. Wouldn't you rather have 8 people because it takes less time and 3 people worked on it? And that gets you off of first base. Then once you have your community, you're not as focused on new people as building with existing people. Because at what point is enough to have you go to work and be more effective? And how is that building taking? Because like any business, if you ask somebody, when does a typical business get cash flow positive? When does a certain business get profitable? It takes time, especially if you're starting from the beginning. And you got to understand that. Now, the sooner you get the best practices, as soon as you get to working with the workers, things will start to change, and success does have an ability to breed more success. And people like growth and expansion. People like to drive by a building and see they just added 2 more floors to the construction of it. That's why a lot of construction sites say coming soon and here's the building, right? You see a big hole in the ground, but here's what it's going to turn into. stay tuned. So Karl, we cover so many bases. Most of it is just human nature too that we're talking about. And how do you relate to that? What thoughts and tips do you have relative to that?
Well, we've talked a lot about the negative, and I don't want to dwell on that too much, but I think there's a difference between no and never. I get requests to do things that I might want to respond to if I had more time or I wasn't totally busy at the moment when I received it. It's like you say, you receive an acknowledgement from someone and you're like, well, I do want to show I heard it, saw it, respect it. And so a real quick like or any kind of thing like that is helpful if you can make that happen. But you also get then requests from people who aren't respectful of you, and when they spam you with one of 10,000 emails, they don't care about you because they don't care about being rejected because they're doing a numbers game. And anyone who totally disrespects me is goes into the never category. So they're blocked or they're something. I do whatever I can in my systems to say, please don't ever bother me again. Don't cross my door. Don't step on my shadow, whatever phrase we're going to use there. But in some cases, no just means not today. And this is where being sensitive to the response is if somebody says no or no, thank you, it doesn't mean that they're disliking you or something, but they're actually just saying this may be the wrong time for them or they're busy at the moment. Same thing that I experience. What's interesting is when you turn that around and you have a relationship with someone and you get an affirmative response, the door may not be propped wide open where you can just walk in and talk about whatever you're going to do, but you are setting the table for that. And this is where having a core community that will be highly responsive to what you ask them to do can make all the difference. So if I have someone invest in one of my projects that I'm working with, I immediately want to go back to them and go, would you please tell all of your friends, your networks, that you made this investment? Because it's possible, even probable, that someone in their group will want to do the same thing, either because this person did it and they're an influencer or a leader, or because they've been made aware of something with a warm endorsement. It's like I'm me too kind of a thing. And it's very important. But for a person to take the time then to turn around and say, hey, you all do what I just did, requires effort and investment on their part. And you want them to do it, but you got to make it easy for them. So I typically will create a little communication kit and say, thank you for investing. I really would appreciate it if you would tell everybody you know, oh, by the way, here's an email script, a phone script, a LinkedIn script, Facebook script, Twitter script. All you got to do is cut and paste. And if you want to modify it, it's all in a format where you can customize it as much as you want to for each individual, or you can just do some blanket postings out there. But by doing that, there again, I'm saying, hey, thank you, but I need more help. But I'm also being respectful to them of the fact that I know it's going to require a further investment of time over and above their money for me to reach out and touch everybody in their network. And that requires that they want to do that and they make it easy, time efficient for them to do it. But if I ask somebody in my community to do something, I also have to be realistic about who has the time, who has the willingness, and what's driving them. Is this truly benefiting them, or are they just doing it to help me as a kind of a payback? Um, and this is part of knowing and understanding your community. You have to know everybody in it. Have to know what drives them. You got to think about opportunities where you can help them, where you saw a newspaper article or you met someone, say, hey, I think you should take a look at this. I think it could be helpful. These are all investments forward that solidify the relationship and demonstrate your respect for the other person. And at the end of the day, you do enough of those. You put enough small deposits in your savings account, your social savings account. There will be build up this value over time where you can pick up a phone and go, can you do this? And I'll go, sure. And you didn't have to explain it or go through all the time associated with that. It's almost a knee-jerk reaction. And that's when you know that you have a highest level of a relationship. And if you have enough people in your community to make a small army out of that, everything's possible.
Well, you bring so many good points up, and a couple I took really strong notes on is making people aware of why you want them or to do something in the context. So in other words, getting to tagging or getting to your main point of gathering 100, 150 people and building a community with them is you're better off sharing in front. Hey, I've identified you for whatever qualification you have that I'd love to be able to start building with you, right? So because of whatever you pick out as your criteria before you even go to the individual and say, here are the ways I'd like to initiate a relationship with you. And one could be, I'd love to tag you in my post, right? Mention you in my live stream, possibly having you as a co-host on my live stream. So in other words, here's 4 things I can do with or for you. And would you find that to be positive? Right? And if they say, no, I'm too busy, or I looked at you and I don't really think it's going to bring any value, that's fine, because you saved that guesswork, plus you asked for permission. And, plus now you say, here's why. First of all, because when anybody comes to you and says, I got the greatest thing in the world for you, the natural response in your mind is, why did I get so lucky today? Right? If I can make you $1 million, why did I get picked instead of all these other people? And you don't even know me. So it must mean that everybody's getting this pitch you don't know either. And it makes the pitch less important. But if you get a chance to communicate with somebody by sending them a message, on their LinkedIn and saying, here's what I'm doing. I'm building a community, and here's how I'm doing it. Here's how I believe I can benefit you initially and even more along the way. I'd like to see if you have an interest in making that move. And even if they say no, at least it was a kind gesture on your part. They also saved you a lot of future effort and initiative, just like I know Karl mentioned, and Erwin especially. They have a checklist they send out, or a qualifying document. And can you please tell me enough about this to say I might be right here? And that would be something. Can you help me out? I'm not sure. And out of courtesy, I wanted to share with you before I initiated anything. And I think that's different than the slap pitch or or whatever the pitch is. I know Kelly's good at explaining it. The pitch slap is what it is. But it makes you think about what you're offering instead of just doing stuff. And it makes you think about who you're trying to work with, because eventually rejection will give you future approval. I agree with you. No, really, in my mind, always meant not yet. And it also was a reflection I wasn't strong enough, or, in order to catch you, I need to do better, right? I maybe moved too fast, didn't share enough. And because of lack of information, you decided to reject it out of hand. And I think Karl makes a great point. But by the way, are these the needs you have right now, which takes care of the not yet? And by the way, what is your priority needs? And if someone says, well, in 3 months, I'm going to get funding and I'm going to launch a LinkedIn campaign. Okay, let's mark the calendar in 3 months. If that happens, let's get back together. Because if you're looking to build a collaboration and not a transaction, it's going to be a mutual type of reciprocal opportunity. And what I found over time, especially if you're not offering something that's exorbitant or, very expensive, is what's their time commitment? I know a lot of people that I know that $500 a month is not a big deal. But if you say it's going to take 6 hours of your time every month, right? You're going to do 2 shows. You're going to go to 2 collaboration meetings. We're going to have an hour on one-on-one. Hey, that's almost a day out of your 20 days of work week. Does someone have that? And then the consideration is, well, maybe do less time and do it on their schedule. And I think that kind of gets people over the hump. But it's really important to know, or for them to know, they are important, that you are considering all of their situations. And it's not about you and what you have, but it's about them and what you could allow them to have more of. And then in essence, you're building friendships, right? Because in order for people to continue, they have to get value. And the value can come from different sources. It could be from growth, but it could be, hey, I just love talking with you, learning with you, growing with you. And in essence, it's kind of like a fractional coach where you get an element of that, but it's not direct coaching. And you're both in the same game. Usually as a coach, let's say you go into somebody who's into mining. Well, it's really all about their mining and their business, because you don't have mines, you don't do that, but you can impact that. So if you can take, well, 20% of my time will be coaching. Maybe 20% of my time will be teaching. But the other 60% is really communicating, right? Because the more I know about somebody, the more I know how and what they do, the easier it is to frame something that's just more relevant and direct to it. And that's what most people end up leaving people, because first of all, it never changes. It's the same conversation over and over again versus, hey, now we hit something that's important. Let's focus on it. So I know we're coming up on top of the hour, Karl. I think communication and community is so important, but it's really just having an idea and having that knowledge share exchange that makes that idea more fortified, because everybody has thoughts. Everybody has, hey, that would be pretty cool. Everything is on the first thought. But until you dig a little deeper and say, well, it's not as easy as it might sound, it's not as fast as I thought it would be, having that context, and then having somebody that is going to be working with you and for you. Because I remember in business, there'd be times at 4:35 in the morning, I'd be looking at the ceiling, thinking in 3 hours, I got to come up with something I haven't figured out yet, but I'm still going to have to do something or say something. And I always felt better when two or other three people might be looking at their ceiling, thinking the same thing. And the next day, did anybody come up with something that we can use? But that's the gift of being creative, being responsive, being spontaneous, but really putting all the puzzle together and reformatting it and re-communicating it in so many different ways. So, Karl, now we're at 58 minutes and 14 seconds. What's your takeaway from the conversation that you found that wasn't there when we initially started?
Well, we're continuing to put our heads together and kind of synthesize, analyze what is a community, how does a community come together. As we discussed, we're kind of on the front leading edge of figuring out how this works in the digital world with a little bit of AI topspin. And it continues to boil down to appropriate respect, mutual respect between everybody in your community. And we talked about, getting no's, and a no doesn't mean never. And I've had people who've told me no after we went through the exchange and tried to see if there was a fit or a reason to work together. But I still got a referral from some of these people afterwards, because I did demonstrate respect for who they were and their decision and why they said no today, which still might be no forever from that particular person. But because they became aware of who I was and what I do, and my attempt to be respectful of who they were, they felt comfortable making a referral to me when somebody bumped into them and says, I'm looking for a capital coach, somebody who can help me with a capital campaign. And those are great to get those referrals. They're not something you can plan for, but they do happen if you invest consistently, regularly over time into your community. They will happen.
Well, you know, the nice thing about a no is it is a definite answer for the time. You know, there's a saying, give me a yes or a no, but don't put me in the purgatory of maybe,
Yeah.
right? Because a maybe will tell me, I don't know when to call you back or why to call you back or how to call you back. So some people who are shy or don't want to be direct will say, well, let me think about it. Maybe we can talk again. And that's, I would rather say, are you in or out, or tell me something, because if it's maybe, I don't know. And plus, nobody likes wishy-washy. You know, I mean, it is what it is, and I can accept anything, especially early on. And that's the key: is you're saving yourself a major investments of time and effort if someone will give you some clarity. The other thing is, when you have something of value that you believe is valuable, and you present it to somebody, it's fresh, it's new, right? And until someone has time to roll it around in their head, and ultimately they find themselves at a juncture that says, I got to do something different. I got to make a change here. And maybe what you suggested becomes something that's a candidate for that, right? And I think that's important. And I think by delivering, hey, no rush, I got plenty of activity, I've got more than enough to work on. And if you're ready, or you want to discuss it in further detail, great. I think to Carl's point, if you have somebody who's in a position that you think really is ready to roll with something like that or be interested, I'd love to hear from them. So it's not also, hey, you said no, I have no interest in you anymore. Goodbye. Right? You got to let people, you know, you got to build people up and elevate them to the point where they can make a decision. But once they've made their decision or made themselves clear, the last thing you'll do is keep pounding away. Hey, you don't understand. Oh, I forgot to tell you about this. And I forgot the game is done for the day. You know, the best thing you do is now de-escalate, thank everybody for their time, thank somebody for their responses. You know, it helped me quite a bit. I gained a lot of clarity, you know, and if you make someone else feel like they still can maintain control, even though you're the one initiated and you're the one who's respecting their decision, you know, because no does mean no. And, you know, it is what it is. So anyways, I think we covered a lot of community. And I think we learned so much together. Appreciate Omar, Jason, and all those who didn't comment but were watching and listening. And we'll look forward to having you back with Karl and myself. And check out Karl's newsletter. I mean, the best way to do it is go to Karl's profile. You'll see all of his posts. You'll see all of his newsletters if you like. You'll see all of his programs. You'll see his background, and you'll be able to make a qualified judgment to say, hey, you know, this person is open to new connections, is open to new supporters, and is looking forward to collaborating with more people. So the shingle is up, open for business. And take advantage of it, right? And then do the same thing yourself. So a lot of these things we're talking about, initiate as a best practice on your part, and come back on the show and comment and say, I tried something, because that would be so gratifying for me and Karl to know that what we offered created an opportunity for somebody, and we can learn from that. So with that said, come back tomorrow if you can. We've got Kelly and a very new person, Ilona, who has never been on the show, Lapari. She's got an interesting business into marketing and branding and everything else. And then I'm off till Monday again. And then Monday, we'll have Karl back with another gentleman who's pretty interesting, Mitch Carson, who is one of the leaders for 20 years in speaking bookings. So he's booked people in stadiums, some really great luminaries, as well as average people who want to get into speaking. So that could be very interesting. And it just gets better from there. So, Karl, thank you very much. It's always rewarding. And I learned so much from you and with you, and look forward to more of these shows.
Thank you, Don.
You bet. Take care, everyone. See you Monday.